Mandela gave 67 years of his life fighting for the rights of humanity. All we are asking for, as the University of Cape Town, the University of the Western Cape, and the University of Stellenbosch, is to dedicate 67 minutes and hopefully more of your time to charity and to a cause which he fought for or one that you can personally identify with. So in a nutshell, Mandela Day is a call to action for individuals, for people everywhere, to take responsibility for changing the world into a better place, one small step at a time, just as Mandela did. It stands to reason that the essence of the legacy of Nelson Mandela has laid down for us through his example the theme of today's program, titled The Legacy of Nelson Mandela and Its Impact on Student Volunteerism.
I sincerely hope that this symposium and all other efforts surrounding it will lead us into deeper understanding, deeper dialogue, and deeper renewed social action. My intention and hope is that Mandela's story will speak to our story, to my story, to your story. All of us that are gathered here today can, should, and must walk away from this exposure to Mandela inspired and enlightened by his story, and by its call on us to transform our story into one that breeds social justice and change. And ultimately, the best way that we can thank Nelson Mandela for his work is by taking action for others and by inspiring change. Therefore, in thinking about the legacy of Nelson Mandela and its impact on the youth of South Africa, we have to ask some difficult questions. We must ask questions about the state of our youth and about what social challenges there are that our generation faces. But let us first consider this man, this iconic leader who has been a universal hero, who is known globally as a symbol of the struggle for justice, equality, and democracy, and is an icon of resilience in the face of adversity and suffering. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, freedom fighter, president, leader, politician, agent of social change. It is true that few politicians in the history of the world have attracted such widespread veneration as is now bestowed on the figure of Madiba. Much more can be shared about the wonderful details of Mandela's political journey, the challenges he overcame, and the battles he fought. But at the age of 93, we realize that it is no longer Mandela himself that can lead our generation, but that we must look to the legacy of the truths and the wisdoms which he lived so humbly. In my own reflection on Mandela and what his legacy means, I became aware of a couple of aspects. But first, allow me a slight disclosure. I'm only 22 years old. I did not experience apartheid firsthand. I do not speak with any authority other than my own experiences of living in South Africa. And to be quite frank, I feel completely out of my depth to be speaking on Madiba and his legacy. But in preparing this talk, I became aware of the facets of my life that would have been wholly different if it was not for Mandela and the freedom he brought to South Africa. The legacy of Mandela means that I can sit with my brother and my sister from another race and be completely colorblind. It also means that I can make claims according to a constitution that ensures my human rights and my dignity. Furthermore, Mandela embodied reconciliation. His story gives me hope that reconciliation is possible. I'm very aware that the transition to a new democratic South Africa would easily have erupted in chaos. Some regard our country's transition as a complete miracle. But Mandela's ability to build bridges between different groups of South Africa secured a stable future for us all. And today, this hour, this gathering would not have been possible if it was not for the work of Nelson Mandela. What is more, to read and to witness what Mandela accomplished pulls one out of the seat of complacency and apathy. My generation will have to learn to appreciate and evaluate what it means to be living in a post-apartheid South Africa. We will have to overcome our ignorance and sometimes our dismissive attitude towards apartheid. Universities must move beyond the classroom to become agents of social change. And as was mentioned earlier, perhaps it's more than just 67 minutes of charity work. Perhaps it's becoming who you are meant to be, following your calling and doing what you are meant to do on this earth. Mandela also grasped the importance of higher learning when he stated, "Education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world." Without a doubt, we can live this legacy through the HOPE project, which is putting academic expertise to the service of human needs.
Madiba is also an inspiration to many, which is why the 67 minutes of service is so important in our country. For my 67 minutes, I did something which I considered very near to my heart, and I spent time at a creche on our university campus. For me, it's important to be the role models to our younger children, just as Madiba is a role model to so many. I can't think about South African youth without thinking about education. Similarly, I cannot think about education without thinking about institutions of higher learning, such as universities. I would like you to reflect on the legacy of Nelson Mandela, but I'd also like you to take action, be critical, and make every effort to implement the values of Tata Madiba in your everyday life, in every moment.
Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that generation. Let your greatness blossom. These are the words of Nelson Mandela, adapted from a speech that he made in Trafalgar Square in London on the 4th of February 2005. But I will be speaking today in the context of that quote and talking about being a student volunteer for change. And the first thing that I'd like to highlight is the context, which has already been mentioned by a speaker on the floor. But we face serious problems in our world today, in our communities in South Africa and in the continent of Africa. We face things like extreme poverty and income inequality. We face a crisis of education in our country. We face a leadership crisis that seems prevalent across Africa, if not globally. And yet, despite this, there are things that we as students and that we as people in South Africa and as global citizens are doing and can do. The first is your standard, what I'm going to call your personal sense of volunteering. And that is things like Shorko and Ubunya at UCT, like the Maties Gemeenskapsdiens, which I believe is at Stellenbosch. But these are things that Ms. Peterson mentioned are in terms of the giving of time and the giving of oneself for the development of others. The second type of volunteering in this real world level is what I'm going to call the impersonal level, which isn't to say it's bad, but it's just a slightly different type of volunteering. And that sort of thing happens very often on campuses in terms of textbook drives, clothing drives, things like that, where you encourage people to donate what they have in order to assist the lives of others. So it's not necessarily a direct giving of your time, but it's very often giving of what resources you have to improve the lives of others. The second kind of volunteerism I'm just going to mention is what I'm going to call virtual volunteerism. And this, again, takes it back a step in that it's not necessary to spend 2 afternoons a week in a township, for example, working there. There are other ways that you can volunteer your time, particularly if you're a very busy university student, as I'm sure many of you are aware, where you can use your own time and you can be flexible in how you volunteer your time. So things like Sparked, which is an online volunteering organization where you can volunteer skills that you have in terms of, for example, helping an NGO set up a Facebook or Twitter presence and helping them get the word out. You volunteer a little bit of your time and it has a big impact in terms of what the NGOs themselves can accomplish. Or secondly, in terms of things like Avaz or Change.org, which is as much activism as it is volunteering, but you use the online resources or you use these indirect virtual resources to persuade governments and companies to change their policies. And I feel that this is also an important part of volunteerism, and that volunteerism shouldn't be limited purely to what we usually understand as you go into a community and volunteer, as important as that is and as much as that should continue. But apart from the practical side of things, and what I really want to focus on today is not so much these things that we go out and we do, but rather the spirit of volunteerism and the mindset behind why we would volunteer in the first place. And it goes beyond what I can do right now about existing problems. It is, as one of the one of the members of the floor said, about stepping up, standing up and being counted. And it's this principle and this mindset that guides people into going into a community to teach maths, or into spending an afternoon at the bookery covering books for a school library. It's the fundamental premise upon which those actions are based. It's not about standing around and waiting for government to provide us with whatever it is we want government to provide us with. It's about stopping waiting for solutions to just appear and creating the solutions yourself. To have that mindset of, I can change things and I'm going to change things. And it's a concept that's integrally entwined with the principles of Ubuntu, where you want to be a person through other people. It's not about you, it's about us. And so it's something that, as exemplified earlier, can manifest itself in a range of ways. But the key idea is always the same. It's about you going beyond you. Everybody has their own skills and everybody has their own interests. And it's because of this that I feel that everybody has their particular role to play. Where you find that role or where you find yourself fitting in is up to you. And it can be a daunting challenge because very often we look for somebody else to tell us what to do and where to go. And there is a role for that, and there is scope for example, universities, as someone mentioned, to play a role in guiding us towards this. But ultimately, the spirit of volunteering and of volunteerism is about carving your own path in trying to craft a better world. And it isn't prescriptive. It's not that the ordinary person should be forced into community service or told exactly what they should be doing or where to go. The whole point of this culture of volunteerism is that people on a large scale actually want to go out and help others, and that they find their space based on how they feel they would be best positioned to assist others while having their own enriching experience. We, particularly as students, and particularly the youth, need to look towards the spirit of volunteerism. The often intangible benefits of such a mindset cannot be overemphasized, and I've chosen to focus on 5 particular aspects and use Madiba's words to contextualize them. So the first thing is to be honest with yourself. Great peacemakers are all people of integrity, of honesty, and of humility. And so this first point is about self-understanding, of understanding who you are and what your values are and where you come from. And it's very often that when you're taken out of your comfort zone, when you go and actively volunteer and do things, that you gain this deeper appreciation for who you are and what values you hold to be important. And you develop this perspective on who you as a person are. Secondly, no person anywhere in the world should not dare to dream of wanting to change the world for a better place. That was incidentally Nelson Mandela speaking on Obama's election victory. We shouldn't just be sitting around saying government must fix whatever it is. And the point of the second point is in terms of self-empowerment. Self-empowerment through volunteerism is a realization that we have the capacity to effect change, from the smallest act of charity right through to, as Madiba did, fundamentally altering the society that we live in. And it is once we feel empowered that we can go on to make more significant changes in our world. So to move from the small acts of charity to fundamentally altering our society. Thirdly, there is nothing like returning to a place that remains unchanged to find the ways in which you yourself have altered. And this third point is about self-actualization. Not only do you understand yourself better and realize that you have the capacity to improve yourself and to improve the world around you, but when you reach out of your comfort zone to help another person, you can also see ways in which you can change as a person and you can develop as a person and go forward. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Louis mentioned this point in his speech, and it's a critical one. It's not just about you yourself and how you can develop, but it's also about understanding how other people live and understanding their perception on the world and their situation. And it's so critically important in South Africa that we start to understand each other, start to create the links between different groups of people, particularly in terms of race, and create these intangible links between each other that will ensure a solid foundation upon which we can move forward. And then finally, as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. And this is about inspiring other people. It's about changing the broader perceptions in society. And I think Mandela Day is a perfect example of this. It's about the first step, the catalyst towards changing our society as a whole, where you take, at a personal level, you take the first step, and other people see that and are hopefully inspired by your actions and adopt those actions. And if all of this sounds a little bit idealistic and far-fetched, I'd just like to add one final quote of Mandela's. It always seems impossible until it's done.